Welcome to the Life Process Program YouTube channel, or if you're tuning into a podcast app, welcome to the LPP podcast. The Life Process Program, LPP, is an online coaching program developed by Dr. Stanton Peele. And at LPP, we help people get past addiction and move on with life. You're listening to a weekly segment of our podcast called Sundays with Stories. Every morning, my co-host Dr. Stanton Peele and I summarize addiction-related news of the week, or we get questions informed by our LP participants. But we give these stories a fresh spin. We focus on the fact that an overwhelming majority of addicted people mature out of their addiction over time. And most people do so without any fanfare. So we want to shine a light on these people and their stories that are missed due to a media insistence, cultural insistence, that addiction stories have to be tragic ones, and that even success stories have to be framed as a person hanging on for dear life and always struggling to keep demons at bay, no matter how much time has passed. So to learn more about the psychology of addiction as we see it and common sense strategies for developing greater balance in life, visit our website at lifeprocessprogram.com. Once again, my name is Zach Rhoads, and I'm here with the creator of our Life Process Program, psychologist Dr. Stanton Peele. Good morning, Stanton. How are you?
Hi, Zach. Good to see you.
This week, you let me roll with this. I've had, building up for a few months, several of our clients are middle-aged men, middle to late-aged men. And out of, I'd say nearly a dozen of these clients, they're on board with our message at LPP. In fact, one person said, I know that meaning and purpose in life is a bulwark against addiction, just like LPP says, but in this guy's case, but I'm 56 years old. You know, I have failed relationships, estranged kids. It's really hard to find meaning. And so, well, a conversation with this person and with these people who are bringing up these questions is something like, yeah, I'm on board. I believe you. I truly believe that meaning and purpose in life is a path forward and away from addiction. But man, I need really extra help finding meaning in life. And in particular, the themes that come up that are people are finding difficult are suggestions to figure out what it means to you to find meaning in work and maybe hobbies outside of work, friendships, intimate relationships, and financial stability. This is not a comprehensive list of the things that we say, hey, let's think about these things and how do they fit into your life. But these are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 points that people tend to bring up again and again, especially when they're men in middle to late age. And they say, yes, these things, but, and then there's always but it's hard for me because. Now, on one hand, that's just what clinical or coaching or therapeutic work is. I mean, someone is coming to you saying, I have an issue. So anyone could dump out, well, why don't you just do these things? Well, a client who's being thoughtful should and will say, yeah, those things sound good, but I'm struggling with them. So how do I respond to this in my life? And you've mentioned before, and I agree with you, that there's not a good one size fits all answer to these questions. But I thought that we could go a little bit beyond, kind of pull out some common themes about what's going on in people's lives, especially in this milieu, this genre, this age group, that could make doing these things difficult to cling on to: work, hobbies, friends, relationships, and financial stability. So if it's all right with you, the way I laid it out is I'm thinking about each one of these things that we say. If you can get a handle on this and really think forward about them, um, you will find that these meaningful activities usurp addiction. And I thought I would go with what could make it hard for people, so that we can kind of respond to that at somewhat general level, if that sounds good with you.
Go ahead. Proceed.
So the first thing on that list is work. So yes, if you can find work, and if you have work and you can find work meaningful, then that is a good beginning. I mean, that's something that, what did Freud say? The meaning of life, to work and to love. And there's a clip of you on YouTube saying you have to work pretty hard to beat that. Well, people have been saying to me, and I think this is pretty common among this age group. Yeah, I work, uh, so that's good. I'm not excited about work anymore. I mean, I'm in my 50s. I'm just starting a new gig, or I don't have a lot of education, and I'm making the money I can make, doing the work I can do, and it's mundane. I'm going to offer a response to that, or something like I kind of melded all my responses that I've given to people like this all together in one little easy one short clip. I'm going to give my response, and I'd like to hear what you think or your add-ons. The questions that I've asked people who say, okay, I know work is important, but Jesus, I'm 55, 60, 65. I'm doing work, but it's not. What do you mean work meaningful? I can't find meaningful work beyond what I have. And my questions to them are something like two parts. One is there a way that you can make what you're calling a mundane job meaningful or creative or interesting day by day? In other words, can you think about what you bring to the table as a person and incorporate that into work? Martin Seligman has, in one of his books about optimism and prospective thinking, um, has a section where he talks about different people in different professions and a lot of blue collar professions. He's talking about factory workers and barbers. There's a culture of people who cut hair, for example, who, they feel like it's their role not only to cut somebody's hair, but to be somebody that is a listener. A lot of times bartenders are in that position too. Like, I'm a good people person and I can listen to people's problems, which makes them feel like, which gives an add-on to their job responsibilities. The job responsibility might be cut hair, take the money, or it might be make these kinds of drinks, get money. But if somebody infuses their own meaning into that work, then they can roll with that and make work a little bit more interesting. And so those are reflective questions I have for people. What are the kinds of things you do outside of work that make your experiences more interesting? How can you impose those or intertwine those with your work experience? And then I'm asking, how can you use your best skills at work or in addition to work, maybe? So that kind of gets onto the hobbies section, so that you're making the experience meaningful and effortful and rewarding. In other words, some people have work that maybe they don't like, but there's other kind of work that they could do. It's like a satellite, and that's enough to make things meaningful. Or on the other hand, they have a work experience that would be mundane if not for bringing their own meaning into it. And so those are the kinds of questions. That's not an answer because it's not specific, because that would be silly to try to make a specific, give specific advice for something like this to a general audience. But it's the kind of questions you might start to ask and you might explore with the client. Your take on that?
Well, what the broader thing you're describing is bringing yourself into your work, giving meaning to your work emanating from yourself. And you're talking about strategies for doing that. For example, well, what are the things you like and what are you interested in? And how can you make that a part of your work? That's what you're describing. For example, if you're a person who likes talking with people, well, there are a number of jobs, hairdressers, bartenders, where that can really be a big part of that. But it's almost like a philosophy of life, don't you think, where people say, well, I'm just going to invest this activity, which may be more or less meaningless, with my values and with my energy.
Right.
For example, I have a good friend who's a bartender, and they have to do 10 million they have to slice up the celery or the olives, and they have to clean the bar and all. And he really gets into that. Of course, people give that a negative label of OCD, but the activity itself only derives meaning from how you see it and how you invest yourself in it.
That's a good lead into hobbies, which is another thing that comes up. People think about this in two categories. There's work and then there are hobbies. And both what you and I were saying at some level has gotten to the point of, well, how do you invest yourself at work? And also, what value skills can you bring to the table? There's some overflow there because maybe you can't think of, maybe you're blocked from thinking about how do you bring something that you're really interested in into your workspace. Um, and for that, there's an idea of making some. Well, actually, let me start here. One of my favorite things that I've heard somebody is doing is that they're basically a paper pusher and they make copies in a workspace. And they discovered at age 60 something, discovered TikTok. And the TikTok for a few years ago was an app for like 13-year-old kids, but now adults, everyone just kind of scrolls those, whatever they are, minute long or shorter videos, and people can make a point, show themselves doing something. This guy at work has made kind of a comical TikTok feature where every day he makes a video of him doing a task at work and show how he does it. And it's either an ironic kind of, well, isn't this fun? And it's entertaining to people. So he's providing as a hobby entertainment for people about something mundane. It's kind of like the show The Office. So that's interesting. That's a hobby, but it's also something he's doing at work, or he's
And
showing
in a
somebody.
way, he's almost zeroing in on his activity. Well,
Right.
he's given the meaning by broaching the rest of his life.
Right. And he's
When I used to go, I used to swim every morning. I used to go up to Fort Tilden, and I kept running into a guy who was a groundskeeper. And, he would be clipping away hedges from around the fence. And I was just so impressed by how he made each one of these activities self-contained. It gave him a chance. He was outdoors, of course. He was having a beginning to it and having an end to it. And it was something instructive that marginally improved this vast New York, Queens environment. And I just reflected on how he was as old as me almost. I was just so impressed with how a person doing just mundane daily tasks could invest so much in them.
There's a second part of this person who makes TikToks. I won't linger on it for longer than he makes these short videos. Sometimes they're comical, and like you said, sometimes he's actually zeroing in on the activity. A little bit of something for everyone. So if there's a creative side to somebody doing a mundane task, it's kind of kicking open the doors for creativity, even though this is like a nothingness thing that they're doing for work. On the other hand, some of the things he does are showing videos about how to, because some people don't know these skills. So it's actually a tactical video that he's making for people. So just an example. And one way or another, it's worthwhile to zero in on the thing that you're doing. And depending on what you're like temperamentally or what you value, maybe you value doing things really well. So you can do each thing really, really well. You can maybe try to be the best at that thing, or you can make things silly, fun, or creative. So you could do something in a mundane thing in a way that other people don't do it. And of course, you can showcase it. People at some of my clients who are 50s, 60s, who try to think about hobbies are thinking, well, a hobby was something when I was a kid, like an extracurricular sport or running, which, my legs hurt, or it was like a chess club. And I don't know any adults who want to do that. So the pushback is sort of, or the ask is, I have interests. It's really difficult to get started on a hobby for all sorts of reasons. Maybe it's I'm aching. Maybe it's because in my later age, I can't think about the trajectory of starting something and then building on it. Sometimes it's just easier when they're bored to drink or smoke or do drugs or whatever it is, engage in pornography. And my question that I ask them all the time is that, well, what are you interested in? Of course, that matters. What do you feel like you have time for, or what would you be willing to make time for? And how could you start a hobby that is enough of a risk that, you wouldn't, if you started it, you'd want to do it proper. And if it failed, it probably wouldn't feel great, but also enough of, low enough barrier that it's not going to be the end of the existential if this thing doesn't work out. And also, how can you think about developing a hobby that builds on itself, where one step informs the next? And how can you be doing it with or for other people? That's a lot in the same basket. But I remember, man, I think we put this in our book, Outgrowing Addiction, a conversation I had with a man who was an English professor who was just, he felt like he was more creative and more intelligent than his job at a community college entailed. And so when he told me about his interests and things that he likes to do, and he's quite a talker, he came to it on his own. Although I put the category out there, I said, there are people with podcasts, and you just, for a podcast, all you really have to do is click a button on your phone and record and put it on the internet. I mean, I said to this person, I can imagine you telling me this story. If I'm so interested in it, who knows who else would be interested in it? Is that something like that, something you would do? And this guy wound up, podcasting, so talking, kind of ranting and publishing it. And also that helped his creative juices flow to the point that he started writing. And once he started something, it did build on itself. It gave him more ideas and more things to do. So that's a way he was doing something for other people, despite whether he knew them or not. And because people were listening in, and it's writing that he did that helped himself and focused on others. So there's always something that you can do, starting with your interests, that you can begin, because beginning is probably lends to itself to interesting hobbies more than doing nothing. And also that he could sink his teeth into because he enjoyed it, and that gave value to other people.
So what you're doing is you're turning people into themselves, and people don't usually say, "Oh, nothing in the world interests me." They say, we talked about work. Well, my work doesn't involve my interest. Or they talk about a hobby, but I don't have enough time or energy to do that. And you get them to reflect on the question of, well, what do you like to do? What are you interested in? What is meaningful to you? And get them to we talked first about applying that at work. How can you project those skills and interests into your daily work activity? Or in this hobby case, you're saying, well, what are the ways that you can manifest the things that are really of interest to you? But first you focus them, tell me what you like. And everybody's got some kind of an answer to that, but they're discouraged about finding an outlet for that. And you almost engage them in a kind of a day-to-day kind of a discussion where you're saying, well, how can you take that skill and apply it in some kind of an activity that you could find time to do?
And by the way, in all of these cases, there is, besides the turning into oneself, there is sort of an executive functioning blip that's happening, where I think in my work with kids, I do this all the time. I think about, well, if I'm asking a kid to do something that involves a process, I want them to know, or it's important for them to know, what does the end result sort of look like, even though if that's a fuzzy, low resolution kind of idea. What will this look like when I'm done? And then kind of work backwards. What is the first step to doing this thing? That I think that's where coaching is valuable, is that I'm able to help. We at LPP are able to help people. What do you enjoy? What could this look like if you pursued something you enjoyed? What would it look like to get started? The getting started piece is pretty hard. Like allowing people to believe in themselves enough to say, I'm important enough, this is important enough in life to get started. So making friends is another difficulty people have, where although people who have commented recently are aware that friendship is a boon, of course, associated with other people, lack of isolation, being pro-social, they'll say something like, I have really difficulty putting myself out there. I've been through, I don't know how to start. I mean, do I call someone up and say, will you be my friend? Do I try to join a group? I've been through friendships, and a lot of them have dissipated, and many of them have failed. So, and at some level, maybe it's painful to take the risk of getting myself involved in social situations, or it feels awkward because at 62, whatever it is, people don't usually think about, well, let me go do a friends making activity. Um, it's, my my open-ended thinking there is, or a question that I might ask there is, looking back to hobbies, can your hobbies or your work actually inform your social activities? Um, are there are there things at work and people who also enjoy things or have the same grievances even as you at work? Or are there people involved in a hobby that you're creating who are interested in the hobby as well, that you can sort of, okay, they're acquaintances, and so you're interested in the same kinds of things, and at some level, if you're doing it long enough, can you, let's say, promote your colleagues to something like friends? So you say, we're interested in this thing, I wonder if we'd be interested in another thing too. I wonder if I could share something more with you. Or can you promote your acquaintances to something like friends? And also, can you keep and appreciate the acquaintances and colleagues and other social interactions that you have, thinking about each kind of interaction you have with a person as a positive one rather than one that you is mechanical. So in other words,
That's two sides of the same coin. On the one hand, you're saying to people what's really meaningful to you and how do you apply that. You began this whole scheme by talking about, well, they're 50 or 60-year-old men who've had a lot of disappointment in their life. They may be alienated from their children or their family. So on the one hand, we're investing things with meaning. On the other hand, for want of a better term, we're being less discriminating. You're saying, well, why don't you just see what your life involves, what is out there, and just make the best of that? Just take a positive outlook to that. It's almost like, David Brooks wrote a column about people who were in despair, which is, deaths of despair is a big concept now. It's almost as though when you've thrown out or when you're shorn of a lot of critical things in your life, you find yourself without family or, without some of the major supports, that in a way gives you a freedom to approach everything as being interesting and positive and investing those things with importance.
I do understand the clinging to failed interactions or friendships or something in the past, and I do understand, as one person put it, I'm 62 working in a profession where most people are 30, and I'm already wanting to be taken seriously, and I would be interested in getting together with colleagues or seeing, associating with other people, bringing the conversation to an elevated, more interesting level. And then on the other hand, I'm afraid to take that risk because I'm already the old guy. I don't want to be the old weird guy. So that's a way you could
Have to
look at
get
it. I
over
think that,
being, feelings of embarrassment and failure. You just have to put yourself out there.
yeah.
Uh,
So
I
the
know
way
there
that,
was, go on.
well, the way that that's exactly what, and of course you don't, if someone's saying I have fear and embarrassment, and we're saying, well, don't have fear and embarrassment, that's not a good clinical approach. But it's true. But the thing that I do with people is, well, let's run an experiment. Let's start small. So if we're talking about bringing the conversation to the next level and saying, you're talking about the coffee machine all day, but it's somebody that you think you're interested in. Can you talk about what's going on at home, or can you, whatever it is, can you have a more personal, friendly conversation? And so you pick a person, you pick a situation, and say, let's try that. You don't have to turn into a new person, a more like the social guy who wasn't yesterday, but you could, let's take the wherever you are with this. Can you take it one step further in a context? And then, since we have this coaching relationship, can you report back? Tell me how it went. And that way, you're doing an experiment. You're doing a thing in a context for a reason. And we can talk through it about it in a natural way and find good parts, optimistic parts of that, reasons to do something differently or keep doing what you're doing, or not. So that's a strategy I have. You might not want to go that clinical route or the motivational interviewing or cognitive therapy route, but I'm interested in what your tricks are to getting through to somebody that way who's hitting a brick wall.
It's fun. We're at a time now where it's become harder to talk to strangers for one reason or another. There's the kind of intrusion thing, and then there's a kind of pandemic thing. But you can still work within that context. I was impressed. One person did a study where they said, talk to the person next to you in the subway. It was the Chicago subway where people sit abreast of each other. In New York, they sit face along two long walls. Mm-hmm. And contrary to every other experiment, which ends up being, well, 58% liked it and 37% didn't like it, every single subject in his study, whether they talked to somebody that was completely unlike them, older or a different race, or somebody that looked very facilitative, said, that was kind of fun. That was really interesting and entertaining. And the other person really responded to it. So even in the current pandemic environment, taking those risks are good. On the other hand, what we've been talking about is being able to say to yourself, well, I've done something, I've reached out, I've tried to be interesting as best I can. And if the other person doesn't respond to it, well, it's just not a reflection on me. The topic I wanted to introduce is you and me both. On the one hand, I'm terribly motivated by one larger purpose around addiction, but both of us get involved in an awful lot of things. I mean, you're a paragon of that. And so I got somewhere in here, I was going to say, well, how do you find so many purposes? I was going to, turn to the topic of, I was going to turn to that song, the Pete Seeger song, and it's in the Bible. It's the best part of the Bible. To everything, and Pete Seeger had it, turn. There is a season, turn, and a time for every purpose under heaven. A time to be born, a time to die, a time to plant, a time to reap, a time to kill, a time to heal, a time to laugh, a time to weep. Everything has a purpose, really. I mean, I know you're involved with your immediate family, with your family of origin, your wife's family, you're involved with your work, you're involved with your music. We haven't even touched on everything that you're involved in. People might say, well, how do you have time for all these different things, or don't you use yourself up? But what you're doing is, what we're talking about is applying yourself and finding purpose in every different segment of your life, in every different interest and area.
Well, now I have, to the extent that people want to know about me, well, how do you do it? They might ask, and I don't think I'm usual, although I love my life. I'm interested in music and I do it professionally. I pretty much turn things that I do into professions, and I've had a strange way of going about it. Like I taught myself how to play music, and then years later, after I played and started making money playing in front of people, then I learned music theory. I'm doing this coaching program, although I didn't go to college to do clinical work with people with addictions. I started doing this because I linked up with you, became really interested in it. And every time I find something fascinating, I grip onto it and pursue it, and to the extent that it's interesting to me. And then I have, of course, my friendships in every one of those settings, or my acquaintances in every one of those settings. And I continue to be curious in them, and I continue to, that sort of drives me. So as much as I'm curious about things, where people might have said, well, that's ADHD, you're focused on too many things, I'm kind of, they're all encompassing. All of the things that I'm doing in my life come into one big purpose for me, including my family and including friendships that I have with people. And those clients, the response I usually get although it could be something like must be nice, a more pessimistic response is usually something like I'm really happy for you. Like people see that as that would really be nice. Then again, you Zach are in your 30s. I'm in my 60s. I've tried this before. I haven't done it. I don't think I'm going to have a flourishing music career, but the point remains the same that it's not the things that I'm doing, it's my approach to them that kind of feed on themselves in a positive way, I would say, in that I take an interest in things and people, and I
How
take
do you
risks and I
deal
put
with
myself out there.
disappointment or being shot down or being given negative feedback either about yourself or what you've produced? Do you have a scheme for responding to not being responded to?
I try to take compliments and criticism in the same way. So I'm human and I enjoy affirmation, and I'm human and I don't super enjoy um, feedback meant to be barbed at me. But I do take critique. I do learn from people when they say, couldn't you do it this way? And I do think it does teach me something. If I really believe in something that I'm doing, especially if I know that I'm right or I know that I'm going a direction with it, and somebody turns that idea down, I ask them about why they're turning it down. If it's someone who's able to have a back and forth, and I learned something. I either learned that okay, maybe I could try it their way, or I learned that this is not a person who's taken the time to understand where I'm coming from. So I'm not going to take that so seriously that it's going to let it thwart my effort in this direction.
And I
So I
think you're
think
sort of dialing back in yourself and saying to yourself, well, I'm a person of value. I've done enough valuable things in my life that this is not meaning that
right, right.
I just heard an interview with somebody. I don't especially listen to his music, but I heard an interview with Weird Al Yankovic. He didn't get a ton of positive feedback in his life. His parents were supportive, but they thought he should get a real job. And well, the funniest thing was they got him an accordion to play music with, which is not
Yeah,
a pop thing. But he said, "Well, I got an accordion, I'll play that." And he made way Sharon. He made one song, and he went to a couple of agents, and they said, "Oh, that's really great. That's going to be your one song." You know, there's usually one hit wonder. They come up with some clever idea, and so people would say, "I like that. I'm not going to give you a contract because where are you going to go from here?" And somehow, if I were interviewing him, I would have said, "You got a fair amount of your parents were supportive. They didn't abuse you. You got a fair amount of neutral to negative feedback in life, and yet you just kind of just kept going on." And I know in my own case, if I said to my mother, "Sarah, well, I made this outreach to another person," my mother would just laugh and say, "Well, they just missed out, you know.
right.
What do they gain by ignoring or rejecting you? Just keep on."
There's and that's a big thing. That's the big thing is and something that we try to instill or get people to think about is that all of these questions come down to I'm uncomfortable, I want value, and although it could seem counterintuitive, it doesn't really to me, and usually once you think about it, it's not counterintuitive. um Providing how you are being valuable to other people, and the fact that you are doing something that you value for some reason actually allows more value for yourself. So,
Gives you kind of
interacting with
freedom. You're investing it with value. If it's not always picked up, well, they're missing the value in it, you know?
as long as you know that something that you're doing is good for someone and interesting to someone, and whether that's you or that's people in your community. And I'll try to wrap it up so we're not here all day, but intimate relationships is the big one for people. In an older age, I think and I'm not 60, or I'm not 65, so I don't know what dating life is like at 65, but LPP clients will say, yes, intimate relationships important. Although I'm starting to feel this might not happen again. On one hand, I'm old and the fling experiences and opportunities are becoming far and few between. And on the other hand, it's hard for me to even get past the hurt of lost relationships in the past and trying to start a new one, which I might fail. And so that on one hand gets back to, look, how can you reconcile the shame, the embarrassment, the fear of doing something? And the other part is, um, I'll usually ask people, you want an intimate relationship? Because I don't want people to think that we've set rules or steps like 12 steps. LPP isn't that. LPP is asking reflectively, do you have these things in your life? Do you want these things in your life? Could you improve on these things in your life? How could you? And so I kind of turn back the question to square one. Do you want intimate relationships? And sometimes people will say, I mean, it seems right. I don't know if I really do or not. So maybe something like friendships are the intimate relationships that people are looking for. If someone is looking to start an intimate relationship or a companionship with somebody, then, I might, a tactical thing is the same way that you promoted a colleague to a friend or an acquaintance to a friend. Is it possible to promote a friend to something more intimate? Starting with friends for the sake of friendship, and then perhaps allowing a friendship with a woman or a man to turn into something more like companionship. If it's a good enough friend, then a step you could take, well, you're kind of getting ahead of the game in terms of communicating with them about things that are personal. That's a good friend, you can do that, and of your feelings. And so if you're developing a feeling for somebody else in a companionship sort of way, then a good friend, you ought to be able to have that conversation. And so that it's at least, putting yourself out there and not saying this is futile. But it's possible that an intimate relationship like a spouse, a girlfriend, something like that, maybe that's not what somebody wants per se. And maybe if they don't get that or have that, there are other ways, as you've been saying, to incorporate your intimacy, your friendship with other people into something big enough that it takes care of those things you would want in an intimate relationship.
I think you put that really well, and we are circling back. Meaningfulness and openness, which implies a certain amount of lack of discrimination, are two sides of the same coin. It's almost like you're saying, well, you're not going to have a lifetime marriage with children at the age of 65, so maybe you should just look for companionship and friendship, and
right.
Whatever is available is some kind of human contact, and you'll feel good about it. And ironically, sometimes when you open yourself in that way by, quote, lowering your standards, you actually maximize the chance for improving that intimacy.
Right. Good point. I will actually end on this, because this is something that I fancy about you, and I think about you in particular, Stanton, in your situation. This is a quote from a single person, but it's a thing that comes up. Okay, financial stability, getting your finances in order. The quote says, "This is the thing that I worry about the most. I'm worried about retirement. I don't have enough to retire on now. I can't work forever. Well, can I? I'm worried that my addictive involvement, let's say, is cutting into my financial stability. So I know I need to reconcile that. And even paying for this program, I could say, is throwing money that I could be saving, although I hope it helps. So how am I going to think about saving money as a 60-year-old? So in other words, to put that plainly and succinctly, Zach, I'm 36 and have invested tons of money into a retirement fund, and I have a really good start. And I'm looking 30 years ahead to when I'm this person's age, and that will have accrued interest and blah, blah. This person's just getting started at 60, and he's thinking about financial stability means retirement, and retirement to me should be right around the corner chronologically, but I can't even get my head around that. So, how do I even think about finances in a way that's not going to stress me out?
Well, of course, I'm looking at that from the other beyond, but you certainly, I'm more than twice your age, and even that person, I'm 77. And I wouldn't say I've got the rest of my life guaranteed going forward, And you know, first of all, being thankful that I have a place to live and enough resources to do what I want right now. And then conceiving of the future as a bit of a challenge and an adventure. I mean, in a way, you're sort of saying, well, I'm not going to create a new career. Perhaps I'm not going to create a new family. Well, thinking constructively about retirement and your old age and using your skills, that's really a whole new challenge in life. And, you know, in my better moments, I'm kind of looking forward to it.
For each of these categories, concerns that people have had, we are hitting on similar themes. So I'll end it this way, because this is a different kind of episode. It's trying to bring direct value to people who have specific concerns. But the general message I think we can draw from it is that wherever you are in your life, you can improve if you want to improve it. And sometimes it's not, if you think too lofty or too far ahead of yourself, then you're getting yourself in this sort of perpetual anxiety. And as you said, sometimes if you can relax and think about, what do I have now? How can I look at that optimistically now? And what little steps can I do to involve myself in making that even better for myself? Well, the worst case scenario in that sense is going to be that you have a pretty good situation. You know, you've taken into account an inventory of all the stuff you have, and you're involved in it, and it's pretty good. But it could be that the relaxation that you've allowed yourself means that these things are flourishing into something that you wanted all along anyway. So that's the counterintuitive measure sometimes people have to take, and it's not you said lowering standards, and that's what people will recognize. Although it's not lowering your standards really. It's saying, this is life. This is what I have in front of me, and this is what I can appreciate if I put my mind to it in that way. So, well, I think we can end with that.
I couldn't improve on that conclusion any more than you've done it, Zach.
Well, thank you, Stanton, for indulging me on this one. And thanks to LPP clients for being able to share and being willing to let me share and talk this through with you. Take care.
Au revoir.